Welcome back to JavaScript Fundamentals 201. This is lesson 10, and today we are going to talk about a data format called JSON. It's an acronym, JSON, and it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Now, even though it has the name JavaScript in it, it is not part of the JavaScript language. It's actually kind of a subset of the language that was derived by Douglas Crockford as a means of supplanting XML to send data to and from the server through the browser. So it basically replaced XML, and we'll look at why it's such a good replacement for XML. But JSON has kind of transcended the browser. You can find it in use in other technological platforms. You can find it in use in database engines. You can also find it in use with computing systems that have nothing to do with the browser or JavaScript. It's just a good format to use because it's lightweight and it is still human and machine readable. So before we look at what JSON looks like, let's look at the data format that we used before JSON, and that is XML. This is a simple RSS feed that demonstrates some of the issues with XML. One of those is that it is verbose. You have to have a beginning tag and a closing tag for each element, unless if you have an element that is a self-closing element, which you typically don't have within something like an RSS feed. So this adds a lot of extra bytes to the data format, and that's typically not something that you want, because if you're transmitting data in between two different computing systems, you want that data format to be as trim and streamlined as possible. So that's one of the things that XML has going wrong for it. The second issue is processing. If we get an XML document in JavaScript, yes, we can process that document, but it's not, I don't want to use the term easy, but it's very time consuming. We have to write a lot of code in order to extract the data that we need from an XML document. And even then, the code that we write is only specific to that particular XML format. So for example, if we were writing an application that processed RSS feeds and Atom feeds, we would have to have code to process RSS feeds, and then we would have to have separate code to process Atom feeds. So it's a lot of overhead, not only on our part for writing the code, but also for the browser, because the browser is going to have to execute all of our code in order to process all of that data. So as far as JavaScript is concerned, there's a much better way of storing and structuring information. And I'm going to open up a JavaScript file. This is not JSON. This is an object literal. This is an RSS object. It has a channel property, and this channel is also an object that has title, description, link, copyright, all of the same basic information from the RSS feed. The main difference is this items array. Every element in this array corresponds with an item element within the channel element. So it just makes sense to put them within an array. So since this is an object, we can directly access whatever piece of data that we want. So if we wanted to access the title of the channel, we would do rss.channel.title, and then boom, we have the information that we want. We don't have to parse any XML or anything like that. The data is already in a format that we can use within our code. So instead of using XML, wouldn't it be great if we could pass object literals as data? Well, we can. That is almost exactly what JSON is, except there's just a minor little difference. And that is most everything is a string. You can see these property names are strings and the values are strings. But the commas, the curly braces, the square braces, and the colons are not strings. Those are there to delimit as they normally are within JavaScript objects. Numeric values are not strings as well. We don't have any pure numeric values here, but if we did, it would not be a string. It would be an actual number. Well, this is what's called a JSON structure, and JSON is a serialized JavaScript object. Whenever you serialize something, you are converting it to a string. So if you serialize a JavaScript object, you end up with a JSON structure. That's exactly what this is. So we could use Ajax to retrieve information in JSON format, and then we can use a JSON object within the browser to deserialize JSON into an actual JavaScript object so that we could use it as we would any other object within our code. So let's look at how we can do this. The file that we are going to retrieve is actually a minimized version of this JSON structure. It is this rss.json.min.txt file, and you can see that it is all on one line. All of the unnecessary white space has been removed, so that cuts down on the amount of bytes that this JSON structure is, which is definitely something that we want to do in the real world. We want to make our data as small as possible so that it transfers faster between the server and the browser. So this is the file that we are going to retrieve. Let's open up our script file, and I'm going to paste in some code. It is creating an XHR object. We are requesting that rss.json.min.txt file. We're doing so in asynchronous mode, so we are handling the onReadyStateChange event. We are checking the ready state to make sure it's 4. We are also checking the status to ensure that it is within the appropriate range, and then we simply alert the response text. And after we make sure that this works, then we are going to use some built-in objects to convert this JSON structure into an object that we can use within our code. So let's make sure our index file is set up and good to go. We don't really need this rss.js file. All we need is this script.js. So let's get rid of that. Let's refresh in the browser, which I already have up. And nothing is happening because we need to save script.js. Okay. By refreshing, we can see that we are getting the information that we wanted. This is, it looks like gibberish to someone that doesn't know what it is, but since we know that JSON is a serialized JavaScript object, we can kind of decipher some of this. We can see that we have an object because of the curly brace at the beginning, and then we have a channel property, which is also an object, and it has some other properties as well. So let's convert this JSON structure into an actual JavaScript object. So let's first create a variable. We'll call this RSS, and then we are going to use an object called JSON, and it's all uppercase JSON. This has two methods. The first is parse. This is to deserialize a JSON structure into a JavaScript object. This is what we are going to use. But there's another method called stringify, and we pass it a JavaScript object to convert it into a JSON structure. So let's do parse. We want to convert the xhr.response text, and then that is going to return that resulting object to this RSS variable. So now we can use rss.channel.title, and that is going to give us whatever is the title of our RSS feed, which is RSS sample. If we look at our JSON, we can see that title is set to RSS sample. Well, let's get the one and only item, and let's look at its description. We can see that the value is an item's description. That's very original, but hey, it works. So let's do channel.items. This is automatically going to be an array for us. And then we want description. That is going to display the text and items description. So that is a whole lot easier than parsing an entire XML document. All we had to do is call one method to convert it to an object, and then we can use that object within our code. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, so now that we have this RSS object, let's convert it back to JSON. Now, this response text is still in JSON format, but, you know, just for demonstration purposes, we'll convert it back into a serialized JSON structure. So let's just call this JSON. We will do JSON.stringify. I did not come up with that name. It would be something different probably. Douglas Crockford actually came up with that name. And then we pass the object that we want to convert to a JSON structure. So now let's alert JSON, and we will see that we have another JSON structure that looks exactly like the structure for response text. In fact, if we do equals xhr.response text, we should get a true. There we go, we get true. And you can also send JSON data using an XHR object. I'm going to paste in an object. It's called person. It has first name, last name, and age properties. And we are going to send this to the server. Now, we're not actually going to send it because we don't have an application to send it to. And we saw in the previous lesson that we can't just send a post request to a text file, at least in IIS. But I'm going to set up the code as if we were going to do that. So I'll change the get request type to post. And then we need to send information. So in this send method, we don't send null. Instead, we will do JSON.stringify and then pass person. That will pass the JSON structure of our person object to the server. And depending upon the server, you may or may not have to set a request header for the content type. If you do, then of course you will want to do set request header content type, and then the value is going to be application/JSON. Now, not every web server is going to require you to do that, but if you do send JSON format to the server and for some reason you get an error and you know that all of your other code is fine, then you might want to set the request header. And unfortunately, I can't give you whether or not your specific web server requires that or not. That's just something that is up to the admins of your particular server. The JSON object is supported by every major browser except Internet Explorer 7. So if you are wanting to target Internet Explorer 7 and still use JSON, you can do so, but you need to use a JSON library to do that. If you go to json.org, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you're going to see a list of a bunch of different languages that allow you to use JSON in that language. For JavaScript, there is a JSON2.js. This was originally written by Douglas Crockford, and it will take you to the GitHub repo of JSON. And all you have to do is just download this JSON2.js, include it within your page, and then you can use JSON within your application. And that, once again, is for only Internet Explorer 7. Internet Explorer 8 does support the JSON object. And that sums up JSON for this lesson. In the next lesson, we are going to look at how we can store data within the browser itself to persist between two different pages. And we will use JSON to do that. So until then, have a good one. I will see you in the next lesson.